Well, this is the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, and we're right in the middle of Revolutionary War country. In fact, the property we're sitting on was owned by a militia member of Washington's Army, Captain Peter Salmon. And his property went from Bud Lake all the way up the hill. And he had a sawmill up by the river top, and there was a trading post down there. Here comes another body. All right, so I'm going to start about the real West Side Story. And it's an interesting story to me anyway, because I lived through it. And I tried to get my DVD working because I have directed West Side Story 3 times. And there's a lot of story to it, and not all wonderful. And the particular musical had a very rough path. But it was first called East Side Story because it was the conflict between the Jewish and the Irish neighbors in the neighborhood in which I grew up. So my plan is to talk first about the neighborhood, and I would tell you I also lost my presentation on Saturday, so I did it over. I hope I got it right. So it's the first time I've done this one. This is now, we talk about the fabulous 50s. They weren't so fabulous because in my neighborhood, which is Inwood, Washington Heights, post-World War II, and a lot of animosity between the Jewish boys. Jeremy, I was called a Nazi when I was 5, so I did what every self-respecting New Yorker did. I hit the kid. And then the second time that happened, 3 of my classmates jumped me, and I hit the kid. I got home and my mother hit me because you're not supposed to hit the kid. So it wasn't so fabulous. You can see all the rock and roll, James Dean, all that wonderful stuff, Grease. They played 50s music in the cafeteria too, ad nauseum. I kind of left that behind. 50s music, I lived it. And you could go into the cafeteria and buy a 45 RPM, if anybody remembers the 45 with the big hole, for 26 cents. And don't dare bring home that Elvis Presley. Don't you dare. It's nasty. So, this is my neighborhood. The setting is called my hood, my neighborhood. If you look in the upper left, that's how you dried your wash. There was no dryer. Mom would give me 10 cents. I'd go down the basement into the washing machine, which looked like it's covered in grunge. And then you climbed to the roof and hung the cloths out, your sheets or whatever, not aware that the coal dust that was coming from the heat was turning them a lovely black. And the other problem then was that we had no elevator. If a building had 5 stories, no elevator, 6, you got an elevator. So my dad, okay?
That's right, a walk-up.
We got all right, who's from New York? Look at that. We're all New Yorkers. All right, the other one is the lovely air shaft. Who remembers the air shaft? A view from my living room window into another living room window where I watched Mrs. Miller beat her kids. So my brother would yell, come on, she's beating them again. And we move up the blinds, and that was the entertainment. It was an air shaft with a guy selling clothes, high cash clothes, and all that stuff. If you lived in the Bronx where Ray lived, what you usually heard on the street was, Anthony, Gemma. And that was calling for supper. Everybody in one neighborhood was Italian. The other neighborhood was Irish. Another one was Greek. And in my neighborhood, it was Spanish, Irish, Scandinavian. Yeah. So this is what we looked at from right below the George Washington Bridge. You can see the apartments over there. That's kind of what I could walk to there if I wanted to. Up on the hill. Ooh, don't touch the thing.
I grew up in.
All right. This is what the back of my building looked like, except it's 1 story too many. What were the fire escapes for? If it was too hot in the summer,
Sleep outside.
Christmas decorations in the winter.
Hmm.
And also the bottom of those fire escapes, there was a ladder and you played basketball through it, through the ladder. There were street games. And if you look at this one, that's kind of the view from my window. It was a real, put it in perspective. My dad took this apartment because $32 a month, but we couldn't get an outdoor antenna when I was in ninth or 10th grade. We didn't get TV till 8th grade. It was another $3 a month. So, and with the magic of, this is my neighborhood. How does that look? This is Dyckman Street and Broadway in Upper Manhattan, Inwood. And this is my walk to school, because in those days we walked to and from lunch. This was the threat of my life. Oh, this is Sunday afternoon. I think that's my dad sitting there with my aunt, but I'm not sure. All the old Germans and Jewish people would go out on Sunday afternoon and sit on the bench, particularly in your neighborhood on the concourse. You ever go to the concourse?
Concourse?
The concourse.
I spent most of my time in Walkerville Avenue, right across from Inwood, across from
What?
on the 225th Street Bridge, right across from Inwood, right up from Dyckman. That's where I really lived most of my life. I was born and lived for 2 years in
That's
Bad
what I'm saying. Yeah, it's the boy leaves the Bronx, but the Bronx never leaves the boy. You got it. Okay. This was my neighborhood was called Frankfurt on the Hudson because there was a tremendous number of German Jewish. I was in my first grade class. There was Bobby Menendez and I, and everybody else was Jewish, and it caused a bit of friction here and there. Particularly, we had Holocaust refugees, Polish, Jewish people. Now, the Polish Jews did not get along with the German Jews. German Jews thought they were better. So, and all my buddies up until my mother was distraught because my buddies were Jewish girls. Oh, yeah, there you go. So there was some animosity, but this neighborhood, you see the Zion kosher sign? Let me show you the next one. The Red Leprechaun. We have a bar in every corner. All Irish bars, Irish cops. Inwood was highly Irish, and that was the first part of the problem. And there's the hedgehog again. We have the leprechaun, the shamrock. There's still one there, which is very unique. It's been there for years. It's got a Spanish owner, black waiters. I don't know all what, but it's an Irish bar. So you figure you come up out of the subway, make a quick left, you're in the bar, you know. And on my way, I'll tell you a quick story. I lived half a block from Our Lady Queen of Martyrs Catholic Church, or as we called it, Our Lady Queen of Martyrs Catholic Church. And a father was standing right outside all the time, you know. And they used it as a schoolyard. So if I walked through it to school, I could be sure to get hit. And the nuns would turn their heads because you sure were allowed to hit the little heathens, right? You're going to hell. I was telling Ginny earlier, I thought nuns had wheels. I don't think they had feet. Those were real nuns too, you know, the ones with all them. Yeah. And a father would stand outside. But this is the end of Inwood, the Loews Theater, which we attended. And you can see what vintage that was. It is no longer there. We have 2 movie theaters, air cooled. Ooh. But this is where I was born, and as the Irish say, bread and buttered. I was born right there. And if you look at the front of the 2 bushes there, they were not there. This looks better than it was. But if you're from New York, there were 2 cement things there. And when it got too hot at night and Yankees were playing in California, we'd go down, sit on the stoop. Stoop, that's another New York word. Ever play stoop ball?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Played stoop ball. Yeah. And Sam Univitz, who was a Polish Jewish war veteran, who really was badly crippled, but he'd sit outside. He was the message board. Hey, your mom's not coming home. There's $1 on the table. Go out and get a pound of choppy. going whatever. And then we were vicious Yankee fans, still drove what?
Inwood Park was right across the street from there, right?
Pardon me?
Inwood Park was right across the street from
No, it's all the way up toward Broadway.
there. Okay.
In other words, this is across the street from Fort Tryon. I'll show you.
Okay, from Fort Tryon.
This was our playground. And with the magic of Google, we would play. What do you think we played there? Look on the right, stickball.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
How do you start a stickball game? First, you steal a broom, then you stick it down a sewer and crack the top off. Where do you throw it when the cops come under the car? And more about car engines later. This was, we moved up the block. When I was in high school, my father gave into a four-room apartment at $100 a month, which he didn't want to pay. Well, in those days, what was he making, you know? And we had a commute from here all the way down to Greenwich Village. So my path, this is Fort George Park. And everybody thinks it was named after George Washington. No, it was named after King George III. The highest hill goes all the way up to the cloisters. So if you were on your sleigh and you made a mistake, you came right out into traffic. And try not to do that. That was not a good idea. Here we go. This is PS 152, where I started my educational career now in New York. And this all feeds into the issue of gangs and conflict. I was the only, I should say, Christian boy in my class. And what they decided to do in that wisdom was they picked 1,000 students out of New York City. And we were labeled as intellectually gifted and pushed through. However, what they didn't notice was that we were panic stricken. I was taken into a dark room to take some sort of test. I was absolutely distraught because I lost my beloved Mrs. Newberger. Remember when teachers had the smocks with the big pockets and the tissues and stuff? But anyway, this is still there. It's largely Hispanic, but if you go up the block, which I think I have on the next slide. So, you go up the block, you play baseball in the empty lot. And if you remember fond memories, Ray, how do you make a baseball? You start with electric tape up the ball, both rays. There's two rays here, fellas. And then you put a screw through the bat that broke. Put your glove in your belt so it didn't get stolen. Then go play on concrete and slide into second base. Not the smartest thing. This is Inwood Junior High School. This is when the trouble started. In sixth grade, they took us into a classroom and gave us a test. I had no idea what the test was. Again, they didn't tell you. They're trying to save money. So they're going to send us into junior high, and I didn't know it, never going to eighth grade. So you're in 7 Special Progress 1 or 7 Special Progress 2. I ended up in 7 Special Progress 1, and I turned 12 in the 7th grade and 13 in the 9th grade. There was no kindergarten. You started, even Catholic school doesn't have kindergarten. So we started at 5.5. And by the time I got to high school, I was 13 as a sophomore. Scary time. But what happened to it was we were very much resented by other students. So there were always fist fights, but in those days you fought off school grounds. But this building, if you look at one of these buildings, is the first schoolhouse in Manhattan Island. It was built in 1850 and I didn't remodel it since. And it had this big schoolyard where we played intramural softball. And you can see here to the right is the original school. It's still there. Of course, now there's a Starbucks across the road. But it's quite an education. It was scary. I'll tell you why in a minute. In those years, they left people back in the public schools. Back to the point that there were guys in my class with tattoos going right into the Army from 8th grade. And they were tough and nasty. They vandalized the school in 1955. And I guess I was 9th grade, we played the tough class. Remember how they numbered classes? SP1, SP2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When you got down to 9, it was not an attractive group. And I was attached to my science teacher. That's another story. But the fights were all over the place, beat up the little kids. And also, so I was out in the schoolyard that you're looking at. You see the basketball hoop there in the game. Well, at the other end was a cement ball field, and I was playing softball against one of these tougher teams. I'm sitting on the sideline. We load the bases. We're behind by 1 run, and the guy puts a knife to my throat. You don't want to get a hit, do you? Could be bad for you. But I was pretty stupid. So I put my glove in my back pocket, took my bat, hit a single, drove in the winning run, and ran straight out the gate that you see there as fast as I could going home. Because I wasn't having any of that. Yeah, but the switchblades were common. Also, when you went to this junior high school, number 1, you carried no money. Number 2, I never went to the bathroom. You get jumped. If you had a ticket, a lunch ticket, you gave it to your teacher, and she gave it to the cafeteria lady. All right, it was $1.25 a week, and the food was gross, but that's okay. Thursday was liver day. Haven't had it. Whoops, did I go too far, Jerry?
Yeah, you got to go back one.
Yeah.
There you go.
This is the Bronx. So comes the end of 9th grade. My mother says, you're not going to George Washington High School because they had a murder in the classroom with a gun that the kid made in shop. Okay, Ma, where am I going? Well, you have to go take the test for Brooklyn Technical High School. Now, I lived in Upper Manhattan. So, Brooklyn Tech, she gave me a subway money, and I went to Brooklyn Tech. And you're going to go to Bronx Science. Now, I wanted to go to Bronx Science because my friends all went there, but you had to take an entrance exam. So, remember Reader's Digest? Anybody?
Still have it.
Where did you store the Reader's Digest? In the bathroom. Where else? So I put a pile so that I could do memorize the vocabulary, because the test was vocabulary and math. And if you didn't get into Bronx Science in those days, you went to Stuyvesant, which got more famous after 9/11 because they got hit. So I got in the Bronx Science, and the first day I get there, I'm sitting in the auditorium, and the vice principal comes in and probably never smiled since he was born. And he turns and says, look to either side of you, you know this drill. One of you is not going to be here to graduate. You fail one subject, get suspended a second time, and you're back to G-Dubs, which is George Washington High School. So I decided that was not a good choice. But it was a very different high school, different experience. And let me tell you, it was funny because the youth gangs, 2 guys come to my lunch table. Who are the gangs around here? And the guy's name, they wore leather jackets. 2 of them, that's all there was. And one of the guys' name was Leslie. We took care of that. Listen, I'm not going to pay attention to you, Leslie. They left us alone because by this time I was a little taller. But this is Jerome Avenue. But Theodore had, I guess, the oldest boy. We lived right up the block from this. The L. All right, this is Bronx Science as I knew it. It's no longer, it's now a Spanish middle school. They moved over to Reservoir Avenue. And what was interesting about that, too, was that the mayor of New York is a graduate of Bronx Science, which has now been supported by the wealthy Jewish students from my era. Now, if you think back, we had a 65th reunion for 1958, but the 75th reunion was next door. And if you've ever watched The Sopranos, Uncle Junior is class of 1948. Bobby Darin is class of 1956, although his name was William Robert Casado. And also, we have from this high school 9 Nobel Prize winners and 10 Pulitzer Prize winners, including my buddy Billy, who was all excited because he got to be a question on Jeopardy. And we had a great time that way. And all the programs were done very professionally, drama included. I probably had the best drama teacher of my life, and she made us do our senior English on her own. which was a challenge. Meanwhile, we were taking senior year and physics, advanced chemistry, advanced algebra, history, music, drama, and English. Kept us out of trouble. But meanwhile, the world was going all crazy. From there, I went to Washington Square College in NYU, which is 1958 there, and seen a lot of stuff. This is the projects. This is what started all the trouble in the neighborhoods. They built in our neighborhood a 22-story series of low-income housing. And when they hit the junior high, it was a very mixed, and I mean more economically, not racially, because all the gangs that formed were territorial. In other words, you'd have black people, Spanish people, white people, one gang. By the way, in those years, you could get suspended for singing in the bathroom. So this one, I think, on the right is the Dykeman projects at the end of my street. This could be where the polo grounds used to be. All that's left of the polo grounds is a home plate. Now, here's where the trouble starts with this project. You can see it. It was an influx of people in a residential neighborhood from all walks of life. And in the Bronx, too, you don't want to go into the South Bronx. Yet the South Bronx produced people like Colin Powell and so many famous people. So this was really the first problem. 1955, my junior high, they broke in at night, tied all the toilet seats onto full flush, the towels, flooded the school. The only classroom they didn't touch was Miss Monk's, because you don't touch Miss Monk's. I guess the problem, they got into youth gangs. If you look on the right, that gang is named the Fordham Baldies, which were not a nice group of people. And here's a young man being arrested. Now, if you look at that picture today, they say picking on them. These guys were armed, mostly garbage can covers, chains, and then it morphed into knives and guns and got nasty. So this on your left is a switchblade knife, which you could probably buy any place you want. And it's a stiletto, is what punctures. And on the right is a zip gun. Now, this is a classic zip gun. Ray and I were just talking on it before, that this one was made in the shop with skill. And the thing you started with a zip gun, you went out in the street and you looked for a car with a antenna that was the size of a 22 bullet. So you broke the antenna off. You could use the rest as a whip. And you taped it with rubber bands to a wooden base. Then you went out and you installed a tire, which had a rubber tube inside. They don't do that anymore. Cut the rubber tube, nail it to the front, pull it back, put a 22 bullet in the antenna. Then you took a nail and put it in the rubber. So when you pulled it back, it hit the bullet, fired. Two things happened. Either you shot the guy in front of you or blew up your hand. I mean, there was nothing. Yeah. No, seriously, it was really an interesting street weapon. And they were all over the neighborhoods. They were everywhere. They gathered in alleys. You'd be afraid to walk down the street. I was on a subway coming home in college when I saw them get on the subway. You just got right off. I have had a knife was pulled on the subway too, but we're still here. This is what the youth gangs looked like. You can see they're mixed racially, and for some reason, that's an interesting race question that nobody talks about. I never got over it. I taught in an all-black school for 13 years. And the New Yorkers found each other, the superintendent included, he was from the Bronx. He said, the difference between people in an all-black school is there's New York and not. He said, if a fight broke out, New Yorkers over there, everybody else over there. He couldn't understand it. I was coaching basketball And the reason I got to that is because one of the coaches were having coffee. Guess which neighborhood he's from? Here you go. He says, "You got a coach, man." And even now, Justin, who drives here, grew up on 138th Street next to Pelham Fritz Park, and I had coached against Pelham Fritz. So that gives you a, stamp of approval. But this was purely ethnic and territorial. You stepped in my territory, I can shoot you. So in this particular year, this happened. Now, this again, the news does not get this story right. The knife gang killed this Michael Farmer. They're the 6 boys who did it, and they were all mixed up. Michael Farmer was up on the trying to think of it. It's on Highlands, Highbridge Park in New York City, and he had polio, so he limped. He was in a wheelchair. And oh, the hue and cry! And what they did was immediately blame it on the Latino gang. What they didn't know, the street word, which I got later in life, he was using the wheelchair as a repository for the drugs that he was selling. And he sold on the other gang's territory. At the same time, if you remember Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? Frankie at 21 died of an overdose. Same neighborhood, same high school, George Washington. So this was just the start. There was, you can see it here. This is Michael Farmer's mother. And what happened, it was a drug issue. They were at Highland Park Swimming Pool on 173rd Street and Amsterdam Avenue. You didn't want to go up there either. So this started a ball rolling of all kinds of nasty stuff. Slight New York youth was buried in Hazleton Grave. This kid was killed in Manhattan, or the Bronx actually, was taken to PA to be buried. And of course, it made the Hazleton papers. So it inspired a bunch of movies too. Blackboard Jungle, James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause. But meanwhile, we as Grease, so we're all the happy greasers are bouncing around. We go together. Well, I think we showed Blackboard Jungle a couple of years ago. Glenn Ford, Sidney Poitier's first movie, and Big Mara. James Dean, they wanted for the head of Grease, but he died before that. So here comes West Side Story. Interesting spin. I couldn't sell it. And it was called East Side Story until all these murders happened. So then they flipped it to West Side Story. And it was Leonard Bernstein, Jerome Robbins, the choreographer, and Stephen Sondheim was not hired to do the music. He did the lyrics because they didn't like this other fellow, Arthur Lorenz's lyrics. Well, here's the problem we had with the show. It was supposed to be Jewish against Irish gangs. Never happened. This happened. So all right, let's go to Latino and white. We'll do that. And but then they couldn't sell it. And they're running out of money. They couldn't get a producer. Nobody wanted to touch it. And finally, they got somebody to pick it up. But they run out of so much money that the original production, he was told, don't even buy a can of paint because you got enough money for that. So let's take a look at it. And this is the production group. From left to right, Bernstein's on the second from the far right. And where's some, well, you can read it. I can't read it from here. Bernstein, Jerome Robbins, and lyricist Steve Sondheim, picked by Arthur Lorenz, and produced by Hal Prince, who was quite the director there. At one point, I was at a conference where I did meet Hal Prince. He also produced Fiddler on the Roof. So he had a very golden hand there. But selling this thing was brutal. Nobody wanted to touch it. Bernstein, who was temperamental to say the least, wanted to do it as an opera, a classic opera, based on what? Romeo and Juliet. Well, they even had trouble casting it. And they cast 2 unknowns, Carol Lawrence and Larry Kurd, in that. And the choreography was brutal because when I've done the show with a full orchestra, partial orchestra, and even less partial, The problem is your action has to match the music. In other words, there's a definite music cue for the opening dance, and people are familiar with it. A brutal trumpet solo, by the way. And so whatever happens, that rumble has to be set to be exactly on the same note every night, which is, you know, it was tough. I give the kids I worked with credit because they nailed it. They really did. And it's kind of a ballet, a band gang or ballet. And here, if you look, this was Maria, I Feel Pretty. This and the thing was an immense hit. It opened in 1957, and these murders happened 1956. So they shifted really quickly to get that thing up there. And when I was in high school, 58, this music, they kept playing it over and over and over. And who else did they play but Johnny Mathis, who went to George Washington High School, the one I was not supposed to go to. And they produced quite a few famous people too. This, if you look at the set, you'll see this is Officer Krupke. I'm down on my knees. I think I've got a social disease. But up there, you can see the curtains, and this is the rubble where he gets killed. Look up in the sky. So what they did is took a backdrop. They did a lot of framework. Like for the balcony, you would use a rolling, what do you call those things? Platform, so to speak. And again, this was a unique musical because for the first time, it didn't have a happy ending. Now, if you think back, South Pacific ends in a big production number. The other thing in a Broadway musical, the number before the end is called the 11 o'clock number. And this show did not have an 11 o'clock number. Music Man does not have an 11 o'clock number. And the worst, most obvious example was in Gypsy Rose Lee, Ethel Merman denied it. I don't want any 11 o'clock number. It's Rose's turn. I'm last on stage. Yes, was she that good? But again, it is a real turn. By the way, Fiddler on the Roof, if you know how that ends, with them all walking off McDonald. And that was, you know, that's another story. Maybe somebody will do the original Fiddler on the Roof. Why tell you it doesn't have a horse? Now, here we are. This was the solution. This is the church I grew up in. I just spoke with them this morning. It has a full gym, has a bowling alley, and they built the theater, and then they ran out of money in 1929, so there's an empty lot, no church. So they used the theater as a church, and when they took the carpeting up, they found footlights. And the lady I lived with, we got married there. Not only did we get married there, confirmed, married, oldest boy was baptized, and our wedding reception was in the gym, so to speak, dance at the gym, right? And it had a small stage that they pulled out every, I think, Shrove Tuesday, and did a show. And Pastor, who was a huge influence in our lives, came out and said, "You're going to direct the adult show." I said, "I'm 16. Can't do that." "Yes, you can." And you had to get everybody on that stage to do their thing. Like Mrs. Bright wore the hat. She always wears the hat. And all I noticed is she had a very loose chin. When she sang, the chin went back and forth. Anyway, the gangs are meeting in the alley. So what Pastor did is he opened the church. And this went across Upper Manhattan. They came into the junior high school. I won't forget it because all the boys were diving under the desk. "Oh my God, it's Father. It's Rabbi. It's Pastor." And all the mothers got together. What they did is they opened community centers. Open it. Actually, we could do what you want. Pastor of this church, and the local gang came in. He said, "Just no drinking." Well, he comes in one night and finds a beer bottle. Do you think he scolded them? No, not Pastor. He put the beer bottle on top of the piano and didn't say a word. And he said, "Do you want to come back?" Done. And we had a very gifted musician in the church who ended up as the set designer for the Metropolitan Opera. And he could hear it once and play it. One of those guys, you know. So we did a lot of the performing we did was at Ellis Island in the mental institution, all because of Pastor. And yes, he taught us how to play basketball. So let's take a look at this is what the church looks like today. And it's right down the street between two. There's a Jewish Orthodox synagogue up the street and a Reform down the street. And pastor used to preach in the synagogue, and the rabbi used to come to us. But what happened in about 1960s, the church councilmen, mostly Norwegian, go, we don't want the Spanish and Black people here anymore because the neighborhood was turning Spanish. So father was president of the church council. Pastor put his watch in his pocket and said, then you don't want me. He stood up and resigned on the spot. My dad said, I'm going with you. And the two of them walked out, remained friends for, well, when my dad passed away, first person I called was Pastor, who was Heidi's son. But the Catholic churches did it, the Jewish synagogue. So they opened up. The solution was open the gyms, open the community center. You see the young man on the top? He played for the 1970 Knicks in the championship year. He was a troubled youth. He was in a confirmation class in our church, and he learned his basketball in the same Quadrilocan gym we had then. So he played for the Knicks and the Virginia Squires. He was a violent young man, but he was 6'9", and it was like my brother was 6'7". And we all played ball in that gym. I got to tell you how many times we did. And of course, there was a youth group and so on. But this is up in Moshua, the Fiore Community Center. They opened that and built these boys and girls clubs. So these kids could come off the street and go in to a facility where they were not being, what's the word I want? They were not being forced to do something. There were no arts and crafts unless you wanted them. Actually, it's at a nursery school where our oldest went, and I used to play basketball there on Sundays with the hospital doctors. That's another story. But that solved the problem. The boys came off the streets. The neighborhoods changed radically. My old neighborhood became totally Dominican. And now it's totally wealthy Broadway. So the $32 a month apartment is now minimally $1,500. Can you say it, please? And that, folks, is the end. Do you have any questions?